Good morning, good evening, good whatever time you're listening to this podcast. My name is James Alban and welcome to episode 38 of The Last Nine. Thank you very much for joining me. On this episode, you'll hear me talk to none other than film and television editor Paul Machliss. Paul started out his career working on some very beloved TV comedies, including Black Books, The Peter Serafinowicz Show, The IT Crowd, and of course Spaced, where he met Edgar Wright. Paul has since edited many of Edgar Wright's films, indeed every one of Edgar Wright's films from Scott Pilgrim versus the World onwards. So in 2017, along with Jonathan Amos, he won the BAFTA for Best Editing for Baby Driver and was also nominated for an Academy Award for Best Film Editing for that same film. We talk about his career, how he got started. We also touch on, right at the end of the podcast, we touch on Edgar Wright's latest film, Last Night in Soho, and everything in between. I spoke to Paul last year. This is another one of those podcasts that I've been very slow to put out. I spoke to Paul last year while he was in LA editing The Flash for DC and Warner Brothers, which still hasn't come out yet. I don't know if it has a release date or if it's been delayed. I'm not sure. But without further ado, here is Paul Machliss. You're in LA, right?
Pretty funny. Yes, I'm in LA at the moment working on The Flash for Warner Brothers now. But actually, I think it's I've been on it since February of last year. So it's an all-encompassing project. So we shot it in England at Warner's at Leavesden, and then I moved over here end of October to start the editing process. Which at the moment still looks like taking up the best part of this year, really. Wow. So, on shows like this, you know, they're never quick turnarounds. Well, there's a point where the editing kind of gets done, but then there's just all the visual effects, just hundreds and hundreds of visual effects that need to be kind of seen and tweaked and signed off and all that kind of thing. And that's what really takes the time, especially once you finish editing, which, you know, we could probably finish the editing maybe the end of June, but it'll take the next few months then to lock off all the final visual effects, do the sound mix, the picture grade, all that kind of thing. So that all takes a few months.
Yeah, because also another bit of background, I mean, it's not hugely relevant, I guess, but I work as an editor and as a director, mostly doing sort of like commercials and like music videos and stuff like that. I can't imagine like the idea that you've got the rest of the year editing the same project, you know, like, you know, commercials and music videos. I think you did did you start doing sort of commercial stuff?
I did. I mean, when I was way back in the day when I was first kind of working on doing editing, you know, when I was 21, 22 back in Australia, which is where I'm from originally. It was commercials. And then when I first moved to England, it was, you know, I mean, a lot more television based. But I happen to think actually that's really good training, really. How do you tell a good story in 30 seconds? I mean, commercials, you sometimes have a little bit more time, but television, especially episodic television, you know, you've got to try and turn over a 25-minute episode over 5 days, basically. Yeah. And that is very, very good for honing your skills, you know. I mean, you know, I sometimes ask why do films like this take as long as they do? And I still haven't really worked out why, although there's enough in each day that, you know, keeps me busy. But I don't know. It just. I think you know, on a feature film, you have longer to really pour through everything and just come up with umpteen different versions of a scene if it needs it, things like that. Or, you know, you do about three hours of VFX reviews every day as well as the editing, because there's so many shots that actually, so I mean, it's a very different beast, but sometimes actually it's nice to be reminded of a nice short show where you're in, you're out, and it's done.
Have you had much opportunity to, because you obviously you made the transition to feature films. Have you had the opportunity to do like the shorter, quicker stuff since? And like, is it weird going back to it if you have, or are you sort of permanently,
I don't know. I think it's. I mean, you never say no, and you never lie back and just think, oh, great, I've got a whole career in films. That's it. Don't look down, because as the saying famously goes, always be nice to the people you meet on your way up, because they're the ones you're going to meet on your way down, and it's you never kind of take anything for granted, and actually. The thing is, if the right thing kind of came along, and actually, you still get asked. There was some, I had to turn down a couple of BBC jobs occasionally, just some dramas and things, just because they were, because of the film schedule, it's like very hard to fit that kind of thing in. But it's still it's nice to be asked. And if the right show came along and the dates worked and everything. I mean, I could, editing is editing, really. I'm not that kind of I wouldn't call it editing snob, but you don't kind of think, oh, features, I won't dare ever look back. Because, over those years that you worked at television, there's a lot of good friends you made. And for me, it's all about the people you work with, really. It's not just necessarily about climbing the ladder. And, there was a period, actually, where I was doing a lot of television. Less films and a lot of television. Maybe I could have transitioned to film earlier, but the fact is that I was really enjoying working with the people who I was working with on these TV series, because there is nothing more enjoyable than coming into work with people who you like, and basically for 9 out of 10 hours a day laughing your head off. Especially if you do, what I do is focus a little more on comedy. It's just great. And you just, and they're the happiest memories, really, I mean, obviously very grateful for when you look at the CV and you go, oh gosh, there are a few good shows there, but what you remember the times and the people you worked with, really. And that's what really makes it enjoyable.
Because I went down a bit of a Paul Machliss rabbit hole over the last week or so. I saw you say that because you're originally from Australia, right?
Correct, from Melbourne.
And I saw you saying that like you were kind of drawn to British comedy, and that was kind of a slight reason, like an impetus to come to London and
for sure,
and trying to get into that. And I thought that was quite interesting, and I wondered if you could talk about that a bit, because the when you look at your CV, which is obviously the last, I guess my maths is not brilliant, the last 7 years or so, it's been Last Night in Soho, Gentleman Kid Will Be King, Baby Driver, but you look at the TV work you did, that we were just talking about, the comedy work, like it's full of my like favorite, or like all-time favorite shows, like IT Crowd. You did some work on Peep Show, Peter Serafinowicz show.
Yeah, like, that was a very nice decade, I have to say.
Black Books.
Yeah. I know it was. Look, it was. It started off just basically being luck. Really, I mean, just firstly getting in with that crowd, which is not something you can kind of just kind of knock on the door and say, "Hey, I'd like to work on your show." But I mean, it's you find your career it's a series of fortunate coincidences, and a lot of people kind of go, "Oh, surely but it's just luck that happened and that happened." I go, yeah. There was a little bit of luck, right place, right time. I think that is a big part of it. But I'm also kind of a believer that sometimes luck is when opportunity meets preparation. In when that moment strikes, which obviously you don't know when it strikes, but you just have that inner thing that you're ready to make the leap. if and when it should happen. And in terms of those shows that you're referring to, I mean, it started out, I mean, completely almost like most things by accident. I was working at a facility when I was still a full-time employee in the West End, and I was running this machine called Smoke, which was an online editing tool. This is before I was actually kind of like a picture editor. I started life as an online editor.
Could you just briefly explain for the audience who might not know,
absolutely.
like online versus offline? For sure.
So offline editing, I guess, is what we would call proper, capital E editing, which is when you sit there, you go through all the footage initially on your own, and then with the director, and you basically piece together all the best takes and the best performances, and then you make the show. And even though nowadays the technology is kind of blended, so sometimes really especially because you're shooting things in high resolution HD, 4K and things like that nowadays, you're kind of doing it all at once. And there's software like, Final Cut nowadays is specifically designed that you can bring it all in at full resolution, work on it, get everything done, any special effects and tweaks, and output it kind of all in one go, which is fantastic. Back in the day when you could still work on computer-based editing, storage, was much more expensive, keeping, hundreds of hours on hard drives. And so you would have you would drop the resolution. So you would have very low resolution picture quality, which was nowhere near broadcast quality, but good enough to see what was going on and to edit with. But it was a bit blocky and compressed, and you'd look at it, but you were used to that. And clients, when they would watch it, they'd know it was, and it was that was the stage of when you were putting it together, and that was known as offline editing. Online editing then was effectively the next stage. Once you picture locked the show, you then took it to a facility, and then they went back to all the original media. And don't forget, really up until, in fact, most of those shows from 2000, that decade, from 2000, so from Spaced up to about 2010, we were still shooting things on videotape. So did you beat it? It really wasn't the following decade that we actually started using Arri Alexa cameras, and for the first time we started having, tapeless rushes and files, as opposed to tape. And so what would happen is that you would go to this facility, you would give them what's called an EDL, which stands for Edit Decision List, which is basically a whole list of numbers which effectively represents every edit you had done in the offline, and it refers to where you would find it on the particular tape, the real number of that tape, because every tape had to be individually numbered, and where it then goes within the half hour. So what you would do as an online editor initially is that you would put it together. You would take the EDL, you would have a copy of the offline edit, so you could make sure you're doing it correctly, and you would sit there and you would do what's called a conform, and the computer would actually just ask for every videotape, usually in numerical order, and would randomly just grab each shot, shuttle the tape up and down, grab the shot it needed, and laid it out for you on another tape initially, and eventually you would look at it and go, great, so there's the whole episode, but now it's in full broadcast resolution. Then the next stage is to either color grade it, because you need to kind of enhance the original look. If you're shooting on location or studio, you've got to balance the colors out. And then any kind of visual effects, if it was kind of green screen work or painting out boom shadows and things like that, you would have to do that. Now, initially when I started, as I said, it was all tape-based. So you would be in a room and there would be one box for everything. There would be a box which had a vision mixer there, that there would be the 4 videotape machines, and then there would be a thing called a DVE, which could manipulate pictures. And that's what your main toy was sometimes in being able to kind of remove things or getting rid of problems in a shot. Or someone says, oh, I'd love that tree to be a little bit more greener, those leaves, could you punch them out? And then could we add the caption here and make it move there? And you would do all of that. And then slowly through the 1990s, there came to be a series of devices which, instead of conforming to videotape, would conform to a hard drive. And this is the first time that you would get very, very high quality pictures stored as on a computer as files. And it was exactly the same way as videotape, but now it's non-linear, like Avid, like Final Cut Pro, like Premiere, but you were dealing with full broadcast pictures, and hugely expensive, because in those days to store even half an hour of on a hard drive of broadcast quality pictures, it was expensive. And these machines, the facilities would charge ridiculous amounts on their rate card per hour to use this. Anyway, why am I telling you all this? So the point I'm getting to is that I was then offered a job at a facility in Fitzrovia, which had one of the first 4 smoke machines. And basically, smoke was a subset of another machine called Flame. And Flame, if you ever do research to the 90s, was the go-to machine for doing television commercials in those days. All those incredible special effects. If you remember famously things like the horses running through the ocean for Guinness, things like that. All that incredible compositing, which is the first time you went, wow, look at what they can do. But it was out of the reach of editors. It was for compositors, and they were a breed unto themselves, and we'd all look at that being very jealous of what they could do. And actually, the people at Discrete Logic who made that software and hardware said, you're right, we should make a version of this for editors, for online editors, so they would be able to conform an offline show on the computer, but then have access to a lot of those effects that was on, that was available on Flame. And so I was offered this job back in when was it? End of 1998, I think. And it was one of the first 4 smoke machines that had been purchased in London. And I think we were the second one. And so I thought, well, that's great, because I'm new job, new opportunity, new bit of kit to learn. And so I started doing that. It was great, and I really enjoyed it. It was such a step up from working on tape, and you could see videotape was slowly going, on its way out. I mean, it lasted another 10 years, but at least you could see the transition to where we are now, basically kind of started then. And then one day I was being told that, there's this show coming in, and it originally was being offered. It was a sitcom. I was originally being offered to my boss, John, who was himself was an editor, but he didn't run the smoke. He ran the older tape system, and he said, "Well, you should try this guy Paul that we've got. He's a young chap, but he's quite good on this smoke thing, and we think for this kind of show, Paul would be an ideal fit." And the producer kind of said, "Okay, yeah, sure, we'll give him a go." And so I was told, "Okay, so you're going to be working on this show for the next few weeks. The director will come in on Monday. You need to start conforming the first episode, and he'll come in with you, and you'll start going through the shots and doing what's required." And there you go. On that Monday came a very young Edgar Wright through the front door. And, like I said, he started off as just as a client. We just started methodically working our way through the first episode of Spaced, of the first series, which was then cut by Chris Dickens. And, I think Edgar and I just hit it off. We realized we both had that slightly OCD approach to getting things right, kind of no matter how long it took, because normally you would do 10 till 6, but we'd frustrate people because we'd always go on. We need longer, and it takes, it'll take as long as it takes, kind of thing. Which I guess in those days was a certain amount of arrogance, but I could see on Space that this was going to be something quite special. And I thought, we got to get this right. We got to get the look right and all the little effects and bits and bobs, that was you had to put the hours in on that.
It's interesting. Sorry to interrupt you.
No,
it's
please,
interesting.
please interrupt.
It's interesting you say that, because like Spaced now is such like a cult show, like, you know, that it's so beloved by fans.
Yeah.
And you always, in when anything becomes like a sort of a beloved thing like that, you always have the question of like, well, did you know at the time that it was going to be this special? And so it's interesting to hear you go, actually, yeah, I kind of did realize that this was a cool.
I could see. I mean, you never knew about the longevity, of course.
No, of course.
But I knew it. I looked at what Edgar was doing. I thought, this guy's got something. This guy's going to go places. This is unlike. It had the comedy, the British sensibility of comedy, which I'd always loved, and as you said earlier, was the reason why it actually was the catalyst for the move for me to come from Australia to England to work specifically on British comedy if I could. But then I could just say, wow, this guy's good, and this is original and different and unique. And so I wanted to work very hard on it. But of course, what happened at the time is that I did the 7 episodes, and it was great. Thanks very much. See you later. Bye. And that was it, because you did that. And don't forget, I wasn't freelance then. I was a staff editor. Edgar went off to, whatever he did next. It was all ready to go to be broadcast on Channel 4. And then as a staff editor, I was told, this is your next job. This is your next client for the next thing you're doing. And I think basically what happened over the next year or two was I started to get slowly dissatisfied with kind of what I was doing, because I was watching the shows that I was conforming, and I started thinking, I wouldn't have put that edit there. I would have cut earlier. I maybe would have got, and you started getting, a bit not frustrated, but oh gosh, I can't tweak this. It's someone else's edit. I can't just go in and and then with that growing that kind of feeling that really, there's. I think there was that extra mountain to climb, and that whole thing of where I realized where the real creativity lay and where you could make the comedy land and work and all that thing was in the offline editing, in the actual editing. Because, of course, when you were an online editor, it was perceived as a high-end thing. You were pretty well paid for the day, and, it was a kind of, a secure kind of gig if you did your job well. And so there we go. In the middle of 2000, I remember deciding, you know what, call me crazy, but I'm going to go I'm going to go freelance, and I'm going to become an offline editor or a picture editor. Now, you've got to look at that scenario. There I was, well-paid job, secure, had the gig. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do something which I've never really done before, and I'm going to go freelance, so I never know where the next gig's coming from, and I don't even really have a client list. The best I could do was actually say to some of the clients that I knew from work, saying, hey, if I went freelance, do you think there's anything you could throw me, just, that I could just kind of do? And thankfully, there were one or two clients who were said, yeah, no, we can do this little thing. There was, I had to do a little documentary about that. Remember the girl band All Saints?
Oh, yeah.
But, it was a start.
Yeah.
And, but I was actually editing, so I didn't care. I was actually editing. And then I did a few things. There was a series called Comedy Lab on Channel 4, which ran a couple of years. And basically it was like a series of pilot episodes, and I did a couple of them, which got me into sort of meeting some new up-and-coming comedy people. And then my big thing was I was offered a 4-month job, cutting a documentary about David Beckham for ITV. And, of course, Beckham was a very big deal 22 years ago.
I imagine I probably watched that when I was a kid, because I was a huge David Beckham fan. So I would imagine I must have probably seen that.
I dare say. But what basically what happened is, just to just to get to the big point, was that I was coming to the end of that. And then I suddenly got a call from Edgar's producer, Naira Park. And she said, "Hey, what are you up to?" And I said, "Well, I've just come to the end of this David Beckham documentary. Why?" And she said, "Well, there's a schedule conflict. Chris Dickens isn't able to finish working on the second series of Spaced to actually edit it. And Edgar was wondering if you might like to come in and work with him." And I said, "Oh gosh, yeah, that would be great. When do we start?" "Tomorrow." "Yeah, absolutely." And you know, I mean, and that actually proved one big thing, and it was basically like, you know, Edgar could have chosen a lot of other people instead of me, in terms of people who had much better CVs than me at that point, better editing chops, the whole thing. But it's a very important thing, this. It's because, you know, he thought, this is a guy I could get on with in the cutting room. And actually, that's one of the single biggest things that over the years I've learned. It's really, you know, it's almost like 20 to 30% how you edit, your skills as an editor. But it's almost like 70%, as much as 70%, how you get on with people, with your director, the people who are going to sit next to you for months and months and months on end. You know, it's that personality, it's that chemistry thing. That'll get you through. And even then, Edgar said, you know, I'd rather work, you know, he obviously made up his mind, I'd rather work with someone who I get on really well with and who has sympathies to what I'm trying to do, rather than someone who is probably a brilliant editor and go, no, I don't think you should do that. No, I think I know, I've been doing this longer than you, and I think I've got a better idea of how it works. Thank you very much. You know, and that was really, in one respect, you know, the big break, which then got me from onlining the first series to then editing the second series, and actually onlining the second series as well. But from then on, that's when that happened. And then when that finished, then dear Naira basically said, "Oh, you know, there's this series we're just doing. We did the first series of it, but the chemistry wasn't quite right between the cast and crew, so we're basically rebooking all the crew again, and we need a new editor." And he said, "It's called Black Books, and would you be up for that?" And I said, "Absolutely." You know, and then the next 10 years, basically, you know, that's when it happened. It's then you got in and you started knowing the directors, you got into the scene, you knew what was kind of around, and you became friends. And I think that was the thing, becoming friends with people, like with actors as well. And then, because I would always go to the studio record, I wouldn't be one of these editors that would just sit in the cutting room and wait for the footage to come in. I'd always make sure I was there. I'd go and visit on set, and I was a visible presence, because I remember it's good to be in the room. I remember saying to myself, just be in the room, just be there. Even if you're not part of the scene, people will say, you know, you're part of that room, you're part of the environment of the people who are putting this together. And that's why over the years, I became friends with as many people in front of the camera and as behind. And so when it came to something like, you know, say Peter Serafinowicz doing his sketch show, he just said, "Hey, do you fancy doing it?" It didn't even necessarily come from the producer director. It came from the guy who was doing it, and said, you know, Peter and I had the same very goofy, surreal sense of humor. And I plugged into his comedy instantly. And so, for sure. And that was, I think, the really nice thing about that decade for me, was that it was just a bunch of friends saying, "Hey, do you fancy working on this?" Yeah.
And you see that in the shows as well, because a lot of the time there'll be all sorts of people that pop up in various things. You know, there's like there's the Black Books episode where Simon Pegg pops up as the guy who owns the bookshop next door. Absolutely. Or, you know, they all, you know, they're all popping up in different places in different shows, and you can see that like cross-pollination of all these people.
Yeah, but that's the thing.
And it's cool to know that the crew were almost doing the same thing as well.
Well, yeah, for sure. But you realize that what you were lucky enough to plug into was that generation of people that were, you know, all moving up in that sphere of comedy, starting in television and then moving up over that decade, and then a lot of them got into feature films, and some of them became very, very big indeed. And even some of the things that you just couldn't do schedule wise. I mean, I remember being offered one of the series of The Mighty Boosh, which would have been fun to do, but you can't do them. You can't do them all.
Yeah.
But still, it was just part of that generation of people who I just completely accidentally found that I was, being in an incredible position that I could be a part of what they were doing. But this is the thing you said before. Did you realize that what you were doing was going to be something special? You during that decade, you absolutely didn't. You kind of knew that, you were lucky because you were working, and I was working maybe 50 out of 52 weeks a year on these kind of things. I think looking back now, what I'm really grateful for and what was surprising is, the shows that I worked on weren't the only shows on television. There were a lot of other comedy shows there. But somehow, some of the ones that I did, as you pointed out, people still talk about, and how lucky I feel, and how grateful that, some of the things I've done, as well in film as well as in television, were those ones where they came on, they were there for 2 weeks, it filled a gap in the schedule, and then they moved on. The fact that people still talk about, Black Books and the IT Crowd and Spaced and Peep Show, I would have been one of these people who would have said, yeah, they were amazing shows. I still remember going on. I'm still enjoying them. If not for the fact that I was actually asked to work on them, I'd probably still be a bigger fan of that. So how amazing. I think that's why I look back and it's crazy, but as you get older, you sometimes think, gosh, did I work on that? Senility approaches, but you forget just how insanely busy I was. Ask my wife, my girlfriend, just how much I wasn't around during all that time, just because of work.
There's a couple of things there that you talked about that I kind of want to laser in on, if possible.
Sure.
The first one being about that moment where you decided to leave the job that was, paying the rent or, but you needed something that you needed more creative fulfillment elsewhere, no matter how good that job was and how much you enjoyed it or whatever. And I think I kind of want to focus in on that a little bit, because I think most people in the sort of creative industries, many of us can probably identify with that. And I certainly did that as well. I was working at a creative agency for 2 years, editing commercials and stuff. And it was a great job and the people were great and all that kind of stuff. But also, they reached a point where it was like, I need to go and do something else. I want to do more directing. I want to edit stuff. I want to edit more creative stuff, and you reach that point where you have to take that risk.
Sure. Well, it kind of, there are a few moments, I think, in people's lives where, you do have to kind of step into the unknown and just have a go. And I've always felt that in my case, it's all my own fault if I've done it well, and it's all my own fault if I've done it badly, I think, because take the the thing about coming over here from Australia. I was not offered a job. I was not come and be an editor in England. I was working for a facility in Melbourne, and over the years, obviously we Australian television bought in a lot of, especially the ABC, bought in a lot of BBC programs, and the way they stripped them, as in programmed them, you would see it 4 times a week rather than once a week, which was usually the case with the BBC. So you'd come home from school and there'd be something like Spike Milligan, The Goodies, Kenny Everett, Doctor Who, stripped together over kind of a 2-hour period every evening from Monday to Thursday. or The Goodies or something like that, and then later Monty Python. And so I got to learn all of that, and I just thought this surreal type of English comedy is great. And I kind of thought, why can't we do things like this? And I realize, of course, is that England is England and Australia is Australia. Our country, our lifestyle, we just don't have that kind of thing where the nature of life in England and the system, the schooling system, it generates people who are kind of well read and have an understanding of that kind of comedy mixed with the kind of lifestyle and the culture. It generates a kind of humor which is completely unique to England. And we had comedy shows in Australia and they were funny enough, but obviously it reflected an Australian kind of humor, and I always felt drawn towards the British kind of humor. So there was always a hankering on I thought when I was a kid, I thought, what I'm going to do? I'm going to work at the videotape department at TV Centre, and that would be it. That's all I wanted to do. In actual fact, I probably had no other desire. I'd sit there in the videotape department and I'd help record and be part of these amazing shows that would be shot in those studios every week of the year. And I thought, that's it. Little did I know. But basically what happened is that I did some product demonstrating for Sony and in Australia, and they invited me to a trade show which happens every April in Las Vegas, called NAB, which is a huge broadcasting show where every equipment manufacturer basically shows this is what's coming out for the next year. And I went to America and I did my little thing, and I met people from Sony in the UK, and this was the thing. And I thought, could I sense an opportunity to at least get over to England? And I said to them, listen, I've been showing off this bit of kit for Sony in Australia and here in Vegas. And I know you guys have a trade show in Amsterdam called IBC, and that happens in September. Now, I know, you probably have hundreds of people in England, Sony employees and things who could do this as well. However, if you ever required, I would be very happy to come over and be part of, IBC for you if you ever needed me to help show off this equipment for you. And they said, okay, thanks, we'll keep it in mind. And I thought, well, there's the pitch. I've done it. I'll go back to Australia. And then in August of that year, I received a fax, as it was then, of course, saying, hi, Paul, it's so-and-so from Sony UK. Do you reckon you could be in London in 3 weeks' time to be part of this trade show, which will happen a few days after that in Amsterdam? And I thought, boom, there we go. And it happened so quickly. I remember I booked a one-way plane ticket to London. The next day I walked into work and resigned. And much to my mother's kind of complete anguish, 3 weeks later, I was literally on a plane to London thinking, okay, I've booked a little B&B in Paddington. I'll go to Amsterdam and I'll do this trade show. So there we go. That's about 2 weeks. So I've earned a little bit of money, and then I'll come back. And then what? Well, I didn't know anyone. I literally arrived at Heathrow with like a suitcase and a shoulder bag, knowing I had these few days in Amsterdam. I booked this little tiny attic bedroom in Paddington, which was so small I could either have the suitcase on the bed and me on the floor, but not both, basically. It was, but I just thought, you know what? I sold my car that I had in Australia. I had some money in the bank. I could afford for at least a couple of months to try and maybe, get a list of the facilities, try and find names of people. And literally I ended up just knocking on doors throughout Soho. And it just so happened that almost at the about 2 or 3 months in, when I started thinking, oh gosh, winter's coming, an English winter, which I've never experienced before. Winter's coming, and I managed to move to a slightly bigger rented room in Shepherd's Bush, but no job. So I thought, oh gosh, what's going to happen? Anyway, I finally knocked on the door of a facility just on the border of Soho and Covent Garden and said, hi, my name's Paul. Here's my slightly pathetic as it then was CV. But I noticed, you run this particular editing kit, which was called Axial. It was an online edit system called Axial, which there were very few of in England. Thankfully, there were very few of, because I said, I notice you run this. I used to run the Axial back in Melbourne, and I'm just wondering, I don't know, you're not looking for an online editor by any chance. And they said, well, funnily enough, we had someone just leave last week. Please come in. And that just sounds like one of those ridiculous things now, knock on the door for a job as an online editor. But I'm telling you, that is exactly what happened. And I was interviewed by one of the other editors, and then afterwards I was interviewed by the managing director, and a week later, you've got the job. And it was like, once again, how did that happen? Right place, right time, luck, the whole thing. I go back to that, and I think that's the thing about, from your question about just having the guts or the nerve to go out there and put yourself out there, and even if it's uncomfortable, and even if you fall, I mean, the amount of facilities that said sorry,
because it's a hard thing to do, right? I still find it very uncomfortable to like sell myself or like, put myself out there. Sure. Unfortunately, it's like really necessary, especially in like this industry where, there's so many people.
There are so many people, yes. And how do you get that one gig if, 1,000 people have gone for it? And how do I know? I mean, how did I mean, they said come in, but surely I wasn't the only one. They knew that this guy had left. They'd probably scoured Soho for other people. I'm sure they had headhunters and HR people looking around. I don't know what it was. Maybe I was just that wide-eyed innocent that come over got straight off the boat, as they say. And maybe you put on a friendly disposition. You try and be a little bit amusing. Once again, it's the chemistry thing where you sort of think, oh yeah, this guy, he could be a good part of the team. And even though, but you see, it's that thing like what Edgar was probably thinking about when he got me on editing space. It was like, there's this guy from Australia. I don't know him from Adam. He's got a CV which is like, oh, I've seen better CVs, but he does run this Axial thing. And I need someone who runs Axial, and there aren't that many people. Yeah. But he seems nice. And, we get on, we have a chat. All right, I'll give him a go. And it's just that point where you've convinced someone enough where you go, okay, in their head, they've mentally weighed up the pros and cons, and they've obviously gone, okay, the pros outweigh the cons. Let's give them a chance. Because, of course, what happens is they put you on a 3-month trial period. If it doesn't work out, they'll say, hey, we gave it a go, but good luck. And yet I survived that. And then, because then I thought, fuck, I've got a job in England, did the TV industry, and I'm an editor. So, of course, I just applied myself and went above and beyond as I did at that point. I really wanted to make sure I held on to the job and I proved myself and that I was worthy of their offering me the job, really.
But that's the other thing I funnily enough, you've managed to roundabout get to the other thing that I was going to laser focus in on. So this is very good.
Oh,
because you mentioned that, it's that 30% editing, 70%. Do we get on? Do we have the same vision? Do we click creatively and personally and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah.
And I think that is, because the editor role on a film is so, I mean, every role is critical, right? In a film. But the editor role, is so intrinsically linked with the director, and it's so intrinsically linked also kind of with the writer as well in a kind of roundabout way. Obviously, the writer, if they're not the writer-director, they're probably not in the edit suite, but it's still, it's all that part of, it's about telling the story, delivering the final, like, vision of the film. And that relationship obviously has continued on with, like, especially like Edgar, who you've worked on, I think 4 films now? Yeah, 4 films now. There was an interesting thing that I learned when I was doing my research for this conversation where I didn't realize you were actually like literally on the set of Baby Driver, like almost editing on set, which for anyone listening who doesn't know, that's not necessarily usual.
No, I mean it's happening kind of more and more, and I certainly didn't invent on-set editing. That's been going for a while. But what I've probably done is just the kind of thing where I have been there every single day, whether it is a day shoot, a night shoot, on the studio, on the soundstage, on location, just actually properly being part of the crew, and not just kind of, doing editor hours, but if you're doing a night shoot, you're up all night, working with as they're filming, or if it's a day thing, sometimes you've got to get up at 4:30 in the morning because the location is an hour's drive away and all of that. And, but that's great because you actually, once the crew kind of accept you, because editing isn't something people normally think is part of a film production, it's fantastic because you have the camaraderie of actually, being part of the unit, being part of the people to the team, actually making it at the point of creating the shot. And certainly for me, after those years of kind of being stuck in darkened basements for many years, it was very nice actually to kind of not totally reinvent, but kind of repurpose what I was doing a little bit, and I mean that was definitely Edgar that I mean it kind of started on, I think, on the Scott Pilgrim reshoots where we were going to go back to Toronto for 3 weeks, having cut the film and within an inch of its life. And we needed some very, very specific shots, which had to fit into the cut that we had. And of course, what we didn't want is to go all the way out to Toronto, shoot it, come all the way back to realize it didn't quite work. So it's like, Paul, is there you could bring, the editing stuff with you on your laptop and stuff like that. And in 2010, it really wasn't all that easy. It was a very kind of a Heath Robinson lash up to put all the kind of bits and bobs together required to do that. But it worked. And actually it worked really, really well. And then on The World's End, Edgar said, listen, we've got these big extended kind of action sequences. It would be great if you could get onto the stage for those. And so at that point I was in the cutting room because I was based at Elstree while we were shooting. And I was there for a few weeks at a time, and then the call would come, hey, we're about to start this sequence, this fight at the Beehive or whatever, could you come down for that and just spend the next 3 weeks on set doing all that? I said, yeah, absolutely. And that was great as well, and involved then going up to Letchworth and working in the freezing cold. I cannot tell you how cold it was that December of 2012 up at Letchworth. I mean, freezing to be outside editing, but I mean, obviously that's something that all film crews have to go through. It was just fascinating for me to be a part of that as well. And then, as you say, Baby Driver, because he and I done so much prep on that film in terms of the music and like storyboards, animatics, and getting all that together. I mean, we'd kind of done about 5 years work on and off before we shot a frame, basically. And I think for that, Edgar said, you know what? Given the nature of this film, you should probably be on set full time. I think it would be great if you could. And I said, yeah, sure. And that's where we came up with the first of the kind of edit trolleys for me, which meant that I could kind of move around and be portable, and I could then quickly wheel my trolley onto the video truck, the video assist, video playback. They gave me a little space so I could bunk in with those guys, and they would help me get the kit on and off quickly and connect up to the playback system. And it worked really, really well, even though I was in all kinds of get up, in odd places, in follow vehicles and in vans, with a laptop balanced on my knees trying to do stuff and things like that. It was great. I mean, in every shot on that film, in almost every shot, I can tell you where I'm standing or sitting or working, I'm just out of sight here or just behind the camera there.
It's almost like an extreme sports version of editing. It's like
it really was. Well, the funny thing is, you should say that because there's some pictures actually out there, I think, on the net. There's some chase sequences we've done, and Edgar and I are sitting in a follow vehicle, which is this specially designed vehicle, which you've got a car and you've got the cameras shooting at the car, and then you're in a vehicle directly behind, it's running ahead of the car, but you're sitting backwards watching the vehicle. And I'm sitting next to Edgar with my little laptop on an Apple.
I'd be so travel sick.
Yeah. But having to wear this high-vis jacket, because, of course, if you're crew outdoors, you have to wear a high-vis jacket. And I just thought, and we're zipping past at 30, 40 miles an hour while I'm trying to desperately hold on with a pair of headphones and listen and all of that. But it's funny. Like when I thought, gosh, this is the only time that I had to require a high-vis vest for editing because it's a dangerous pass. The only time I just thought, gosh, I never thought, editing would be an extreme sport. Basically. But that was quite crazy.
You'll have to stick with me with this question because it's going to go on a bit of a... there was a thing online. So when Bohemian Rhapsody won Best Editing, there was this viral video that went round where this guy criticized a particular sequence in that film and, gave a reason why he thought it shouldn't have won Best Editing that year by picking on this one particular scene.
Yeah.
And then there was a very interesting video that came out subsequently where the editor, John Ottman, was on a podcast and he responded to it. And he talked about how, I don't think he appreciated the whole film being valued on one scene, which I can totally appreciate.
Absolutely.
But he talked about, that film seemed like it went through a lot of variation because it changed directors and all that kind of stuff.
That's right.
But he also talked about working with the studio and how and what the process is there in terms of, you've got to work to what the director wants, but you also have to work to what the studio requires. I thought that was maybe an interesting topic to discuss, and how. Because if you take Edgar Wright's films, for example, you watch them and they're such they are so much a vision. You can tell an Edgar Wright film, almost straight away, and he has a very particular style. And I wondered what the balancing act is like between catering for what the director wants versus what the studio want in a film, and then how you as an editor work those two things.
Well, what normally happens is you see it works in stages, and so you always find yourself you always find yourself in almost every film going through these particular stages of getting the end result. The first thing, of course, is when you're actually shooting, you put together what is basically, the editor's cut, because you're doing your assemble, where the director normally, and I'll speak more generally, not as someone like me who's on set doing all that stuff, but the normal process is that you do the editor's assemble, and so you get all the footage in day by day, and you put it together almost like what you feel this first pass should be. And it's good in some places and not brilliant in others. And there's things missing because, you have a second unit that's going to do pickups of inserts and a C camera. 4 months later, they're actually going to do the shot that you need at that point, to bridge two other shots together. So it is literally like a jigsaw puzzle that you start to put together. If the director has time, sometimes you will send him or her sequences to view. Oh, look, this is what we've done this week. Here are the assembles of that. And some directors don't like to look at it at all. They just don't want to know. They want to wait until they get into the cutting room before getting into the process. Some directors just watch it and go, okay, well, that all kind of makes sense and things like that. Other directors actually even then might start giving you notes about saying, actually, no, I was thinking you could use this angle for that line rather than that. But the point is you're basically making the assemble. So that's your version, without the director present, of just putting the film together, making something that's basically playable and watchable.
Yeah.
With lots of gaps and holes and VFX that won't be there for another year and all that kind of stuff. But everyone realizes that. And then when the next step is done, when that step is done, the next step is the director's cut. And normally then what happens is that the director is usually given, on average, about 10 weeks, 11 weeks to come in, and he does his edit with the editor. And during that time, there is generally no studio involvement or interference. He actually is given his right, especially if he's a member of the DGA, the Directors Guild. He contractually has that time without interference or suggestion from anyone else to put together his version of the film that he wants to show the studio. And sometimes when you do an assemble, it could be 3 hours long because you've shot enough material for 3 hours, and then part of the director's cut is getting that down to 2.5, and you want to play the studio a 2.5 hour film, knowing that you're probably going to cut another half an hour out and make it 2 hours. So that's when you kind of do the pass with the director over those 10 weeks. And, you refine scenes, you get each scene looking the way he more or less would like it to look and like it to play. And, that's a very enjoyable time when you put that together with him, because then you can go through all the takes. Do you have any alternate lines, reads for that line? Or can we see that off that angle? We should try doing it, and that's where you can try lots of options, and that's a nice part of the edit, because it's just you and him or you and her just putting that together. Then the time comes, of course, when you show the studio, and it's like, okay, let's see what we've got for our money and what we've been filming for the last year or 2 years and all the prep and pre-production. Let's see what we have. And normally, of course, it's like, usually people go, oh, great, wow, no, it's fantastic. It's great. It's really, really good. I have a few thoughts as executives, and basically from then kind of starts the toing and froing, basically. And it's a kind of a political thing as well, because then you'll get notes back from the studio sort of saying, we're not quite feeling the emotion of this character when this bit is happening. Do you have a moment where, this occurs and things like that? So you'll get sometimes a few notes which are about, finding the emotional core of the scene. And then you'll get notes as, do you actually have a better take of that? Or could we end up, or do you have a different bit of music or something like that you could use at that point? And you kind of then start doing some notes, but what you're then working up to, of course, is the first audience preview screening. And so, you may cut the film down a little bit more at that point, and you'll take some of the notes into consideration. But at that point, it's kind of up to the director. They're going to go, okay, I'm going to action these notes from the studio, but these ones I really feel strongly about. And when you're involved in that, it's an interesting thing, because, of course, I always say, as an editor, your first loyalty is to the director, because you're supporting his vision. But you're there at all the kind of studio debrief meetings, and when they give you feedback, you're jotting all the notes down. I mean, there is an interesting thing where, and I think this is also some of the beauty of the way we edit now, certainly like, computer-based nonlinear editing. And I think it's one thing that I've actually learned over the years, when someone says, well, have you thought about doing it like this? I think what is great nowadays is that, in the past you might have just sat there and go, no, not going to do that. Sounds awful, terrible, not going to try. I think what's great about now is we can go, well, let's try it.
Yeah.
Let's see what it looks like. If it's really bad, we don't have to do it, but we could say we've tried it and we can have a go. And in fact, that's exactly how it works between an editor and a director. Sometimes a director will go, have you tried putting it together like this? And you kind of go, oh, in your head, you go, oh, no, that's just going to look... But okay, let's try it. And I think that's part of the thing. There's no reason to kind of say no, because you can come up with an idea and show it to the director and go, okay, we've had a look at it. I think I still prefer my version, says the director. At the end of the day, his word is law, and you kind of go, fine, we tried both, or you prefer that. That's absolutely fine. And I think that's part of the beautiful process of putting it together. And because, you have your ideas, the director has his or her ideas, the studio have their ideas. And I think it's about finding the happiest medium between all three. I mean, will you be able to please all the people all the time? No. And it gets to a point that sometimes the more screenings you have, preview screenings, or the more times you show the studio and they keep pushing back on the same notes, I really think we should try a version of this and like that. At that point, it's kind of like, okay, you've got to let the grown-ups battle it out then. That's the thing where, well, the director should speak to the executives about, this is how I feel, this is how I've shot it, I really feel this should be in, and here's why. And, but even nowadays, you still have various options, because you can have preview screenings on various kind of things. Sometimes, and we've done this before, is that we've had 2 preview screenings in 2 adjacent multiplex.
Oh, that's interesting. Of different versions. Of
slightly different versions.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And in fact, even on Soho, we did 2 different things, because I was feeling very strongly about one part of a chase sequence, and Edgar was saying, oh, no, I think we should keep it in. And I was saying, oh, we should keep it out. So, okay, let's try 2 versions. Let's play this one to this audience and this one to this audience.
Who won?
And I can't remember.
Oh, okay.
Edgar won. I'm sure
Yeah.
Edgar won, actually. No, in fact, to be honest, I think he's probably tested better at that moment. And you go, fine, well, we gave it a go.
Yeah.
And I think actually that's the beauty of it, because you're there. All the executives will come to the screenings, because all the executives are keen to see how the film, rates. Because, of course, on these screenings, what they're called NRG screenings, because they're hosted by a company that will basically, arrange for people to come in. They sign NDAs, non-disclosures, so they don't go blabbing about it on the internet. And then they fill out questionnaires at the end. And then sometimes they get 20 to 30 people who stay behind even after the rest of the audience has gone home, and you do a little focus group. And they sit kind of at the front 2 rows, and there's a moderator who keeps asking, which character did you like the least? What was your favorite moment, least favorite moment? And then you, as a production unit, directors, producers, editors, executives, all sit a few rows behind, and you listen. And sometimes the answers can be quite surprising. What you think works absolutely doesn't to some people. And then at the end of that, they've got a little computer backstage, and they've basically collated all the data, and then they can give you this readout, which actually shows like males under 30, males over 30, females over 30, least favorite character, most favorite character in percentage points, would definitely recommend, would not recommend. I mean, it's fascinating to see how that works. And I think normally what happens is the studio are usually happiest when on every preview screening, those numbers go up. They want to see those numbers go up and not down. And thankfully, with most films we've done, those numbers always go up, because, of course, you're always improving the version. But then there are those little bits, those kind of personal things where you go, well, that film had that version of that moment, this one had that one, and they will ask the audience, what did you think of the moment when so-and-so happened?
Yeah.
So you can get a definite answer. And I think that's also the joy as well, is that everyone feels they're very strongly about their thoughts, and everyone feels that they're really right, and this is why. But you still get an opportunity to prove that and to test it. And I think that's the thing. There are moments where I sit there and I go, I feel so strongly about putting it together like that. I mean, I really, and you have a passionate thing about it, and you can have these long discussions, and there are hours where actually I'm not editing with a director and we're just talking. We're talking about the scene. We're talking about, and part of that, I go back to that 70-30 split of editing versus, the personality thing. Sometimes editing in a cutting room, and like in this room here, isn't actually just about editing. We stop and we talk about character development. What would we do? What would we do at this point that would be a bit different? And sometimes it's a little bit like, hey man, I see, are you okay? Because how are you feeling about this? And then sometimes you very occasionally just sit there and say, well, what can we do? What can we do? How do we improve it at this point? How are you feeling about this? And it sometimes literally feels like a bit of a psychoanalysis session, really, because, a director, they put every time, I'm sure they put their life, their career on the line. It's their whole life, this film. And you can make all the contributions that you want and everything like that. But at the end of the day, it's their name on the tin.
Yeah.
You rarely get judged in that kind of respect, because by that time you're on another film with another director, another set of problems. The director has to go and live with this film. He's got to go out there and promote it, usually all around the world, to good reviews, bad reviews, indifferent reviews, and he's got to take it. And it's like, the buck stops with me.
Yeah.
So, and you feel that a lot, and you want to make it work. As the studio want to make it work because they want profit.
Yeah.
For them, of course, it's still the economy of trade and business, and they want to make money out of it. For the director, it's a lot about his vision. How will he be perceived as the maker of this film? And so there's a lot of people you have to kind of satisfy, and that's the thing. You'd love to think, oh, we're making a work of art here. It's amazing, and we're so proud of ourselves. But we could possibly be getting indulgent, and then the studio go, yeah, but you could make this, but it's not going to make nearly as much money if you have that kind of downbeat ending, or we'll give you some money, we'll reshoot. And then, in fact, that's the other thing. Then there gets to a point where, in fact, on almost every film that I've done, you actually then go off and do additional photography because you realize what you did initially didn't work as well, or actually you have to cut out so much of the film, you have to cut out such a large section that there's a point where the story, the threads of the story don't connect anymore. So you need to write and shoot a new scene to connect the bits that you've got left. You have this new, middle scene to help push the story along. I mean, that's one reason why you say, why does it take so long editing films? It's because of all of this.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And then even when you do additional photography, it's like, right, okay, we've got to get a film crew together, a new unit. Who's available? Is the same crew available? When's the cast available?
Yeah.
The sets are in storage, but we need to go on location. Okay, when is that location available? And it all just takes time, and with that, money.
There's also an interesting thing that John Ottman said in that little clip that I was referencing, where he said he would actually go back to he's looking at it now, I would go back to that specific scene, and it's probably a few things I would tweak. But he's but the point is, this criticism was focusing on the macro. No, the micro, sorry, the micro. And he's the point of editing is it is about the micro, but it's also much more about the macro. It's about it's about the whole picture.
Well, it is. It is. And in actual fact, to expand on that slightly, that's what I find so incredible about the actual craft and the art of editing, because for a lot of people, especially, people who vote for, awards and things, what a good soundtrack sounds like. You can sit in a room and go, wow, this sounds awesome. What a great atmos mix. These guys are really talented. You can look at the cinematography and go, beautiful, this stunning cinematography, costumes, sets. It's all there to be seen and to be understood. But what's great editing? What is good editing? What about, that's a great place to put a cut. Nice edit there. Nice dissolve. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not a tangible thing, editing, and I've always kind of said, when an editor does their best work, nobody notices, and the other catchphrase I'm accused of saying far too often is the art is to conceal the art as well. And that's the thing, because people go, well, the editing, a lot of people don't know what editing is. It's such a dark art to a lot of people. And, when John talks about the wider thing, he's absolutely right, because it's almost like, did you enjoy the film? Did you get involved in the story? Or did it take you places? Did you go through an emotional thing with the film? Did you respond to it in this way? And you go, yes. Then you liked the editing. Then the editing was that thing which guided you through the whole film. It helped make everything look good. Everyone did their bit, and the editing is that invisible art, as they call it, that strings it all together. But you can't put your finger on it. You can't just, sometimes you can look at bad editing, and I know that exact scene they're talking about when they're all sitting around a table outside and everything is like, and you can look at it and go, that's a little bit odd. Now, I suspect, as an editor, John absolutely had his reasons for cutting it like that. I mean, that's the whole point. And poor John, I remember that there was a bit of a backlash at the time, and I remember, I think there was an article in the Washington Post actually where he actually had to come out and defend himself. And I thought, why an editor of all he has to now be in the national papers, kind of justifying why he's won as an editor, for God's sake, and I just thought, wow, that's incredible. I know it was a difficult film to make. It fell between two directors. Yeah. And I also happen to think he did a remarkable job of just keeping it together between two directors with two visions, and the studio in the middle of it, and trying to make this story work. It was, of course, it's a popular, it was a popular story. It was a story that, still has millions of fans who love and identify with the music.
And it's such a difficult thing to take on, that's something of that significance to a lot of people,
absolutely.
And
at the end of the day, but at the end of the day, you see, this is the thing. It doesn't feel like it's two directors.
No, it doesn't.
It doesn't feel like, it feels like, people respond to the music, people respond to the story, and that's why John got the Oscar, because it's a film that, despite everything, it works. It was popular. It made a really good profit, and John was part of the team responsible. It's all about means and ends, and that's the other thing. Means and ends. At the end of the day, is it a good film? Have you enjoyed it? Did it do something for you? Then it's a good film. And the editing is part of making sure that story is being told, despite the fact that, if you even knew half of the backstage ructions going on in the creation of that film and the post-production. I mean, I can't imagine, there would have been some pretty, hairy moments, given the politics going on with the directors and everything, and just trying to make a coherent piece of work with people with two different visions. And so in that respect,
I didn't catch that.
Sorry, that's Siri trying to interfere. And so I think in that regard, I think John was absolutely deserving of Oscar.
We haven't talked about really at all Last Night in Soho.
Okay.
I've seen it twice now. I saw it twice in the cinema, and I just loved it. I thought it was brilliant, and I thought it was also really interesting talking to some people about it, where I heard people say, "Oh, it's not really very Edgar Wright," and I saw it and I thought it was very, very Edgar Wright. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you know what, I know that's kind of a vague sentence, but like I guess maybe it's because it followed on from Baby Driver, which was very stylized. And I think Last Night in Soho is very stylized, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen you talk about how it's more subtle in those kind of, the synchronized moments with the music and the transitions and all that kind of stuff, and how Last Night in Soho starts differently from a lot of Edgar Wright films, which start with a sort of hits you quickly, whereas Last Night in Soho starts a bit like, those sort of old horror films that it's referencing, like Don't Look Now and stuff. It starts with quite a sedate start. And I've just realized there's no question there. So I'm just talking about how much I like Last Night in Soho.
An artist by any means should progress and should move forward. I mean, I think at one point there was a school of thought is, why can't Edgar just keep making variations on Shaun of the Dead?
Yeah.
Really, why wasn't The World's End like Shaun of the Dead? Oh gosh, it's nothing like Shaun of the Dead. Well, of course it's nothing like Shaun of the Dead. I mean, I think that's the thing, and especially, like say, with World's End, where we made Simon, the anti-hero, and Nick was the sensible one. I remember at the time it came out, everyone just said, whoa, this is not, where are the laughs? where's the kind of, that element that made Sean and Hot Fuzz, and actually what's interesting is that I think a lot of Edgar's films, I think the good thing about it is they all take it's like a fine wine. They tend to ripen with age a little bit. And actually now then people go back to, like, Scott Pilgrim tanked when it came out. It fell between two stools, and it totally underperformed when it came out in 2010. And, but it never quite went away. And, a year or so ago, Edgar and I were involved in the kind of 4K UHD remastering of it. And it's actually then when that comes out and there's a bit of publicity surrounding that, then you realize just how many people love the film and how much of an influence it was to people, and just how amazing, and I think that's the thing, as I was saying before, about how lucky to have these films that you've been a part of that have this kind of longevity and have a repeat value. They don't just hit the cinema, smash and grab. They make their money 2 weeks later, they're gone for the next film, and then, you forget about, oh, what was it I saw of you? I don't know. Those films are just, and I think with Edgar's films, they all have this long-lasting value to them. And I think every film that Edgar's done indicates, an artist with a different idea and a kind of a different approach. Obviously, Baby Driver, was a very different thing from The World's End. I mean, that had a lot of planning. I mean, Edgar knew exactly what he wanted to do in terms of Baby Driver. For Soho, that was also an idea that I remember Edgar telling me back in 2012, the year we shot. That was a busy year. We were shooting World's End later that year. We'd actually done a camera test for Ant-Man at the point where Edgar was still going to be doing that. Plus, I'd already started helping him on bits for Baby Driver, some of the musical things. I'd just bring my laptop over. We'd start assembling music playlists. And then we decided to walk into Islington to have lunch. And he then relayed to me the story about Last Night in Soho. So he had it all going on. I remember that year being, wow, so many ideas coming here. And I don't remember that much of how he told me the story, but I just remember at the end of him relaying it to me saying, you've got to make this film. It's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. And so I was very, very happy to be part of the team when I knew we were actually going to go ahead and do it. And I think Soho, once again, it's a different kind of thing. We took, like I said, we've taken the ideas from like the behind the scenes bits of Baby Driver and applied them to Soho, from a technical perspective. But I think it's got to be different. And in terms of Edgar's influences on that one, yeah, the fact that it does take about 25 minutes to get going in some people's terms. I mean, for me, it gets going from the off, but it does borrow from a kind of filmmaking and from that era where it was like, well, hang on, we're setting the scene here. It takes a bit of time to get it. It's not just going to land on your face like Hot Fuzz does right at the beginning, and it's wham with this.
And it wouldn't work if it did, because
it would no, absolutely not.
I actually the first time I saw it in a cinema, and it had a bit of a dodgy sound system going on.
Oh,
and certain speakers would sort of turn off and then turn on again. And it was quite distracting, but I didn't notice it to start with, because what was weird is they were actually, the speakers either side of me were off, like incorrectly at the start of the film. And I thought it's a bit odd that all the sound feels like it's coming from the front, but whatever. Because it was supposed to be like a Dolby, like an Atmos thing. And it was kind of weird that it wasn't right. And then, weirdly, those speakers turned on the first time Thomasin McKenzie's character goes back into the 60s and she arrives at the I've forgotten the club now that she goes into.
The Café de Paris.
The Café de Paris. And that's when those speakers turned on, and it was suddenly like it was almost like everything had opened up, and it was really weird. And so at first I thought that was a very interesting sound decision, but I later learned it was the speakers being rubbish. But that moment is where it suddenly goes, like, it's almost like everything turns to color, it's kind of that in that weird sort of in that.
But you've put your finger on somewhere there again, because I was going to say, if you ever saw it again in a cinema, I don't know if you noticed the same thing, because in fact, I think because I'm sorry to hear that where you went to sounded like there was a technical issue.
When I saw it again, I saw it at the Prince Charles, and it was very good. The sound was brilliant.
Well, here's the thing: it's very deliberately done. That in actual fact, we did do this thing that up until the point where Thomasin kind of emerges into the Haymarket, the Café de Paris, the sound is in fact just coming from the front speakers.
Oh, okay, interesting.
That is completely deliberate. So
maybe, okay. Because I did notice that. I mean, there was a mix of technical but maybe I did hit on something. Okay, that's interesting.
No. It was definitely that kind of, pardon me, the allusion to like Wizard of Oz, the black and white into Technicolor moment, because we had this thing about, well, when it's all just on the train journey and she's in London and all that, we need to make that sound very plain. And so in actual fact, all we're using are the three speakers, like the left, center, right speaker in the front. And a couple of things, when people first heard it, they thought, oh gosh, this sounds pretty shit, really. Maybe there's something wrong with the cinema. And in actual fact, when we actually submitted the film to Universal, they actually rejected Reel 1. They said, well, because there's a fault. There's no sound on any of the surrounds or anything. I said, no, that's deliberate. This is on purpose. And so it's one of those things we held back from doing anything exciting sound-wise until Thomasin crosses the Rubicon and goes to Haymarket. And if you ever see it again in like a proper Dolby Atmos cinema, you'll see that the first reel and a half, all the sound just comes out from there, and it feels like a film from the 70s or 80s, where the sound just came out of two speakers at the front. And then when she crosses over and the song "You're My World" comes up into the chorus, especially in Dolby Atmos, you will then just find the whole sound moves out that way, and then with Atmos over that way.
Amazing.
So it completely envelops you.
Yeah.
And so for people who initially kind of think, oh gosh, this isn't like Edgar, this is pretty flat mix and it's dull and uninspiring, that was on purpose. We just sat there going, let's hold off, let's just wait, and then once we're in the first of her flashbacks, let's open the whole thing up.
Because it's almost reflected in. I mean, I'm trying to remember it now, but it almost feels like I may just be putting this on after the fact, but it almost feels like that's almost reflected in the colors as well. Like,
oh gosh,
like the early scenes are a lot less bright and colorful, and then as soon as she's in that room with the neon sign, and that's when it all starts.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Chung, our cinematographer, was an absolute genius with color. And you'll notice that, the colors just get more and more extreme, as the film progresses. Also, what's nice is that we change a lot of the earlier scenes are shot with, spherical lenses. And then when we go to the flashbacks, they kind of move to anamorphic lenses. And in actual fact, there are some scenes where we actually dug deep into the vaults at Panavision, and we actually use these wonderful B series lenses from the 1960s. And so, because back in the day they were lovely, but they were kind of imperfect because they would fall off on the sides and the edges. They'd get a little bit smeary and out of focus. And of course, nowadays with digital, the trick is to have it sharp all around. Every pixel is sharp, and that's kind of what's expected these days. But back then it was like, this is kind of the anamorphic kind of newish technology. This is about as good as we got it. But of course, what was great is a lot of those lenses were used to shoot the films from that era that we're kind of referencing. So it's very nice being able to not only stylistically borrow from that era, but to use some of the actual technology from that era as well. And so, even though I think you need a special adapter now because Edgar still shoots on 35mm. I think we only did digital for some of the night scenes, but everything else was 35, and we're still using Panavision cameras. And I think you still need a mount to put the B lenses on the.
Because I was lucky enough to see a 35mm print of it at the Prince Charles.
Yes,
so that was
absolutely.
Nice.
And then, no, it's nice for that, because I think Edgar contractually, they say, we'll make you a 35mm print of the film, which actually looks nice. That actually it originates in 35. Yes, it goes through a digital process, but you can output a 35 version of it, and it still's got a nice kind of crinkly feel to it, so to speak.
So there you have it, Paul Machliss. My thanks to Paul for joining me on the show, and my thanks to you, as always, the listener, for joining me on this episode of The Last Line. That's it for this one. Not much to keep you abreast of. Do check out all the links in the description of the podcast. You'll find in there the link to my new podcast called Cruise Next that I do with my friend Elsa Grace. It's a film podcast. The first episode of that is also in the podcast feed of The Last Line. So check that out. Go subscribe and give some love to Cruise Next, and join me next time. Thank you very much for listening. I've been James Albarn, and this is The Last Line.